Well, welcome to everybody. It's great to see you all. I'm Rabbi Devorah Lynn, and I am in Washington, D.C., right outside Chevy Chase, with Mirla and our steering committee. And I'm a co-chair of Jewish Earth Alliance, and I've really been enjoying running these monthly meetings and meeting all of you. So I want to get started right away. We've had a very busy week, and we've got a lot to talk about. And for our spiritual uplift tonight, to start our meeting, I'm delighted to welcome Rabbi Barry Kenter, who was raised in California, ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, and rabbi of the Greenberg Hebrew Center in Dobbs Ferry for 31 years. And he thought he retired, but he has served as an interim rabbi at several more congregations. And through his work at the Greenberg Hebrew Center, through his work with Greenfaith and as a Jewish Greening Fellow, he encouraged and was successful in getting the Greenberg Hebrew Center in Dobbs Ferry to enact many changes for climate, both large and small. So, I want to introduce you to Rabbi Kenter, and he will inspire our meeting.
Thank you, Rabbi Lynn, and thank you for inviting me. And it's great seeing Mirla. We spent some wonderful times together, so thank you very much. There's a phrase that shows up 3 times a day in the daily Amida. And it reminds us, V'al nisecha shebachol yom imanu. We thank God for the miracles that are daily with us. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about miracles that impacted me as I was growing up, and how they focused my attention. And then from there, I want to move in a slightly different direction. So I grew up in a place called Burbank, outside of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, in the foothills of the Verdugos, and fires were not uncommon. About once a year, there'd be a fire on the hills behind my parents' home, and I remember very early on black ash sprinkling down, something akin to black snowflakes, onto our home. And I remember the worry that everybody had, because if there was a fire destroying the chaparral, that meant when the rains did come, that there'd be mudslides. And so we grew up with fires and mudslides, and we grew up with smog. Smog was a part of my everyday existence. Smog was not unusual to the LA basin. When the first Spanish explorers came to what is now California, they actually named a place La Bahía de los Fumos de los Fuegos, the Bay of Smoke and Fire. Because of the inversion layer, the fires of the Chumash Indians couldn't go anyplace. And so they would see above the basin the smoke. I remember the pain of smog in my eye, and I would long for one of the miracles of California, which were the Santa Ana winds, which would come in the fall and the winter, and they blow away the smog, and we would have a chance to have something akin to blue skies, at least briefly. When I was a kid, I was able to go to the high desert and be exposed to just the beauty of the wilderness, exposed to wide expanses of sky. And then as an adolescent, when I was at Camp Ramah in Ojai, California, it was another experience of actually spending time in nature, and subsequently spending time in Yosemite. I was fortunate enough to be able to study abroad, and while there, I saw literally lambs leaping and rams jumping, something akin to the psalmist. It was early spring. I was on a train going from Brussels to Bruges, and I looked out of the train window, and literally there are small sheep jumping in early spring, and I was astonished. Suddenly, the words of the psalmist started to speak rather strongly. I was able to go to Finland for a couple of summers. We had an exchange student from Finland, and she had invited me to come up, and I spent time in this marvelous forested area. And we're talking a long time ago, but one of the rules from, let's say 45, 47 years ago was that motorboats were forbidden in the lakes of Finland. Because already the Finns were well aware of the gift they had from the lakes and the streams, and to protect them as much as possible. When we were growing up, I'd ask my father, my sister and I asked my father, what's your favorite color? My father would say sky blue pink. And we'd say to my father, there's no such thing as sky blue pink. And then I discovered the Jersey Shore and the color of the sunsets. And now that we're living in New Rochelle, from our terrace, I can actually see sky blue pink. And each of those times makes me be grateful for just those moments each and every day that we all take for granted. Early on, when Judy and I first met and we were preparing to get married, we had a discussion and she said, I will forgive you virtually anything except taking me for granted. And I'd like to suggest we take an awful lot for granted. And the world in which we inhabit, we took for granted and haven't cared for it as much as we might possibly do, which leads me to point number 2, which is the following. Our tradition cautions us, don't depend on miracles. Ein samchim al hanes, and actually the full text in the Babylonian Talmud, a person should never stand in a place of danger saying that they on high will perform a miracle, lest they don't perform a miracle and we lose whatever benefit may accrue to us. We can't assume that it will all be taken care of by a higher power, a higher authority. And so we serve God. We're asked to look out for the world, to tend it, and to serve it. And we serve it in many, many ways. One of them is the Jewish Earth Alliance and the work that you do. This is really important work, and it's small steps that really do make a difference. Having our voices be heard and making sure that we don't wait for someone else to take care of it or some other power to take care of it or things to just work out in some miraculous way, because unfortunately that's not the way the world now works. And so I'd ask us all to be grateful for the miracles that are with us daily and to work to make sure that those miracles continue. May God bless the work of our hands, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Amen.
Yes, amen, amen, and amen. Thank you so much, Rabbi Kenter, and for those wise words to keep us hopeful and keep us going, and know that, as you said, it's not by miracles that these things happen. We have to act. So thanks very much. Well, I want to welcome everybody here tonight. And how many of you are from California, like Rabbi Kenter? We got to, he asked, where is everybody from? And how many people from the East Coast? Great. And Midwest? Do I have any? Yeah, great, great. So what I'd like you to do is to go into the chat and put your name and where you're from. And if you have an affiliation you want to share with us, that would be great. So we'll do introductions like that. And while we're doing that, I would like to ask Amy Dick, a member of our steering committee here in Washington, to review for you the action alert that we have this month. So Amy, will you fill us in while people are signing in? Unmute yourself, Amy.
I'm happy to fill you in. My internet connection seems to be unstable. Devorah, will you just raise your hand if I cut out?
Okay,
Okay.
I will.
All right, thank you. So some of you may be aware that we have put out 3 action alerts so far in jobs plan, and each of these alerts had a different focus.
Yeah,
The first one was on this.
yeah, it is kind of unstable. I'm sorry. Your our action alert.
Why don't you
How about if Miralam, maybe
let me
Miralam, what did you want to do, Amy?
let me relocate and
Or maybe
begin
turn
in a
off
couple
your video.
minutes.
Does that work if you turn off your video and just talk to us?
Oh,
That could work.
okay.
Or I could have Miralam
See.
brief us tonight. What do you think? So we wanted to, and while she's getting settled, we wanted to invite everybody to, if you would like to stay after, we thought it would be a great idea if you wanted to write letters together with this group, even though you'll be writing to all different people, but it doesn't matter. If you have the time and want to stay after, that'd be great. That'd be great. Where's Amy? Did she go? Oh, there she is. So what do you, did you move, Amy? Or shall I have Mirala do it?
I'm afraid Meryl is
Yeah,
wait till the meeting, in which case I should have relocated by then.
yeah, okay. Okay, Mirala, you want to brief us a bit?
Okay, so as you all know, we're focused on the American Jobs Plan and the infrastructure bill that is being negotiated based on the plan. We're going to hear a lot about that from Katie, I'm sure, soon. But the main thing is that we know that this is the most far-reaching climate legislation that we've seen ever in Congress, and we have to do everything we can to make sure that it is passed, but also that the climate solutions, the equity solutions, the resilience solutions that are all incorporated into this plan are kept in the final legislation. So we're asking you to stay the course, keep contacting those members of Congress. And each month we've tried to focus on a little bit different aspect of the plan, just to keep it interesting. And this month we're focusing on the climate resilience pieces of the plan, which are the funding that's going to go toward things that are going to help to protect people and communities from the impact of climate change. It's really hard to separate one thing out from another, but this month that is what we're focusing on. Steps like making the electrical transmission system more robust, cleaning up hazardous wastes, which I learned hazardous wastes are a big danger when there are extreme weather events. Just think of what happens when there's a flood, you know, next to a power plant or a coal mine or that kind of thing. Renewable energy systems that are more flexible and efficient, conserving public lands, forests, and wetlands, and investing in nature-based infrastructure. So we're going to hear a lot more about that, but we hope that you'll all be weighing in with your members of Congress this month.
Great, thank you, thank you. Let's see, all right. So yeah, I've seen what happens when there's a hurricane and your dump is right next to the water. It's not a pretty sight. So mixing the two things, weather disasters and dangerous facilities in vulnerable places, it's not a pretty sight. So tonight, our featured speaker, we're welcoming back Dr. Katie Harris, who is a policy advisor for the BlueGreen Alliance, an organization uniting America's largest labor unions and influential environmental groups to solve environmental challenges by creating quality jobs and building a stronger, fairer economy, which is what this bill is about. And there are going to be plenty of jobs available to do all of this work that's in that bill. Katie leads the Alliance's federal policy efforts, including infrastructure.
Honestly, you know me. I'll be like, fuck, we're coming down.
Whoops.
I'll just text you.
Who do we need to mute?
I already have reservations.
Let's see, Steve Katz, can you mute, please? Thank you. Katie leads the Alliance's federal policy efforts, including infrastructure, climate, and coal community issues. She advised us last year on the Reclaim Act, which is an legislation to unlock money to work on issues of coal mines and other mining that has been laying fallow and polluting. In her past life, she was an archaeologist and researched how prehistoric societies dealt with changing climate and economies, which I found very interesting. Katie was on Capitol Hill as a science policy fellow with the House Natural Resources Committee as well. So, Dr. Harris, please enlighten us tonight on what the BlueGreen Alliance is doing.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm happy to enlighten you. It sounds like you have done a lot of work already on the American Jobs Plan, so maybe I'll just start with a little bit of how we view it as the BlueGreen Alliance and why we think it's so very important. And it's definitely not just us; it's us in a good chunk of the country too, to be honest. So. Back in March 31st, the last day of the month, President Biden proposed the American Jobs Plan. And I think it's hard to understate how critical this plan is and how this plan comes at such a critical time. Obviously, we need climate action. We need to rebuild our infrastructure. But we're still reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's touched every state, every industry, every worker in the United States. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, the employment was at a high of 14%. That's just extraordinarily high, and it's terrible. And even now, the employment rate is sitting at about 6%, which is still a lot higher than it was before the pandemic. So, when you say it will create jobs and thinking about the American Jobs Plan, that's still needed. Every month, we're getting the reports that jobs are growing, jobs are starting to come back, but not like they were before the pandemic, and certainly not at the sort of skill levels that they were before the pandemic. It takes a lot of skill to be able to install and maintain infrastructure. So I'll just highlight a few of the things that we were really excited to see. I know that your emphasis is on natural infrastructure, as we call it, or resilience. So I'll spend a bit more time on that, but there's just so many good things in the plan that it's sort of hard to not at least talk about some of them very briefly. It is a $2 trillion plan that, of course, has been getting negotiated as these things do in Congress. There was some hope today, or at least we thought there was some hope. There was an article from The Hill that said that basically Democrat leadership are saying we're going to move ahead, and we're going to move ahead with reconciliation, which means that they can do it in sort of a fast track way that isn't necessarily bipartisan, probably won't be bipartisan, but to be completely frank, would probably get more climate and infrastructure solutions than we would get otherwise. So that's good. And the other good thing is that the polling across the board for the American Jobs Plan says that everybody wants this. Democrats, Republicans, across races, across, everything, people want this. It's something along the lines of 70% of Americans think that the American Jobs Plan, as proposed by President Biden, should pass. So it's just really strong support. It's not, something that people really are arguing about very much. So with all of that being said, I'll jump into a couple of the things that we're really excited to see in the plan. One of the things is water infrastructure. Water infrastructure can be everything from the gray, like pipe infrastructure, all the way over to the resilience. Just about everything I'll talk about today has to do with resilience. As you said, Devorah, it's really hard to separate things out sometimes because it's all sort of interrelated. One of the biggest things we're really excited to see is $45 billion to completely replace lead service lines. Throughout the entire country, that would probably just about replace everything. And that's extremely exciting because it's so bad for the health of babies, and it's even bad for the health of adults. It causes cardiovascular problems. There's also a significant amount of money in there for what are called the state revolving funds, and those funds are often used by states and localities to update and maintain their infrastructure. And it's one of the main ways that states and other municipalities can actually make their infrastructure more resilient. So for those of us who are in DC, which is me, or Maryland, you might be familiar with the city of DC has been working on drilling very large sewer overflow tunnels for a number of years now. And that is an example of how cities can use their money by drilling those big overflow tunnels. It means that we're not dumping sewage into the Potomac and the Anacostia rivers. It means it's not overflowing into streets. And there are certainly things like that are happening throughout the country as well. So that's sort of the water infrastructure side of things. Same thing with transportation infrastructure, which is a big thing in here as well. You know, we think of infrastructure as being roads and bridges, and that's certainly featured in the American Jobs Plan. I think it's really important to talk a little bit about all of the things that happen as climate is changing and how that will affect our roads and bridges. Corrosion gets much worse, and so you need a lot more frequent funding to just keep them from disintegrating before our eyes. And you also need to be able to pay people to go out and repair them when there are historic floods, when there are hurricanes, all of these weather events that are happening as a result of climate change. And so building the resilience into those like roads and bridges, which we think of as infrastructure, is also really, really important. Buildings and school infrastructure are also included. On the school infrastructure side of things, schools are horribly defunded all over the country. I'm sure you've all seen this. Many of them were built post-World War II in the 1950s and haven't been updated or have only really been minimally updated since then, which means that there's the everyday things like leaky roofs, pipes that don't work. But there's also concerns of extreme heat, of extreme rain that come again with climate change, and concerns about how we rebuild those schools to be more resilient as we go into the future. So there's some funding in there for schools, particularly for schools with high poverty, school districts with high poverty rates. There's just pure grants. So they don't have to match funding. They don't have to take out a loan. They just have grants to rebuild their schools and build them in a more resilient way. One of the other things that we really see, the BlueGreen Alliance calls it social infrastructure, but when we say social infrastructure, we mean all of the people and the services it takes to run our built or our physical infrastructure. So the example I like to give is you can have hospitals and you can have schools and you can have municipal buildings all over the place, but if you don't have really highly trained people to work in them and to run them, then you might as well just have an empty shell of a building. So when we think about social infrastructure, we think about how do we need to be training our workers so that they know how to deal with the ever more present heat waves. I heard somebody say how hot it is in the Western United States right now. I mean, that is extremely unusual for this time of year. I grew up in Utah. My family is still there, and they're not used to it. So how do we deal with that? How do we train librarians, school teachers, just anyone how to deal with that? How do we make sure that our healthcare workers are equipped to deal with that? How do we make sure that our hospital workers have an idea of what kind of diseases are coming in? As climate changes, we're going to get more particularly mosquito-borne illnesses like Zika, malaria, or they're going to start migrating north. And so the United States as a country will have to start thinking about that more than we have in the past. And then one of the other big parts of social infrastructure and resilience that appears in the American Jobs Plan, it provides $400 billion for Medicaid home and community-based services. And so this is funding for home healthcare workers, people who work in hospice, people who work with folks who are just permanently disabled. It provides a lot more funding for them, and it provides them with the training that they need. One of the BlueGreen Alliance's partners is the Service Employees Union, and they represent a lot of these workers. And if you remember the Paradise Fire in California a few years ago, these folks were tasked with trying to evacuate a lot of people out of the area, and they had not received any kind of training for it. And of course, as we all know on this call, wildfires are probably just going to keep getting worse. And so there's a lot of these things that we do sort of take for granted to some extent, as we heard in the opening, that we have to really think about a little bit more consciously now. And the American Jobs Plan does do that. And then finally, if we're talking about sort of nature-based resilience, or what we like to call natural infrastructure at the BlueGreen Alliance, it's really about rebuilding our natural defenses. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. There's coastal resilience, making sure that you've got healthy marshes, healthy beaches, so that when you do get those massive hurricanes, it's less likely to inundate the land with storm surge. That is something like the Civilian Climate Corps, which is called for in the American Jobs Plan. It's really a better CCC that we're all familiar with from the Great Depression. The idea is to build resilience, not just in sort of conservation ways, as we're familiar with, but also sort of, as I mentioned, in like the social infrastructure way, or in building efficiency, just sort of all over the map. It's meant to be much broader than our traditional idea of a CCC would be. And then finally, because we are an organization of workers and environmental organizations, I have to say that one of the great parts about the American Jobs Plan is the emphasis on protections for workers. It's got a whole lot of really great labor standards, job quality. It's got the entirety of the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, or the PRO Act, which would basically just make it much easier to organize as workers in the United States, which is fantastic. And then I shouldn't have said finally, because I just forgot something. But the last thing I will say, but before maybe I pause and I can tell you a little bit of what we're seeing coming up. There's a hint of funding for a just transition. So if we're going to really address climate change, we have to also address getting off fossil fuels. And that means that a lot of people are going to be put out of work. And a lot of those jobs aren't easily replaced. It's not necessarily one-to-one. You can't just go from working in a coal plant to working, in a solar plant, for example. So there's a lot of work that the United States as a country is going to have to do in order to make that happen. And there's sort of the down payment for that, I would say, in the American Jobs Plan. It's rebuilding our manufacturing so that we can manufacture wind turbines here. It's a dislocated worker fund, so that we can help those folks with just basic, unemployment, healthcare needs while they're retraining and retooling themselves for a new job. So before I end, and I'm sure we'll open up for questions, everybody's wondering what is going on with this thing, because it was released in late March. I feel like in the news, it's just been, oh, we're doing negotiating. Now we're not doing negotiating. Last week, there was a very funny moment where President Biden ended negotiations with Senator Capito, and then immediately started negotiations with another group of senators. So we were joking at BGA that we were ending bipartisan negotiations to start a different set of bipartisan negotiations. At this point, though, it doesn't seem like a bipartisan package is realistic. And in fact, as I mentioned sort of at the beginning of when I started talking, we're expecting that Democrats in the House and the Senate are going to move forward probably sometime in July with their own package that will look really, really similar to the American Jobs Plan as proposed by President Biden. So right now they're working on the budget resolution. It's basically just saying, here's how much we would like to spend in FY 2022. and they're working on doing all their wonky things to get that through committees and get that out on the floor and voted. And then when that is done, they'll probably start really actively moving forward on this. So the timeline right now is looking like over August recess here in DC and into September will be a really critical time. But now is a really critical time too, because now is when a lot of the committees are doing their behind the scenes work, and they're telling House leadership and Senate leadership, here's the bills and here are the things that we think should end up in this package. So thank you for sending the action alert out and for sending letters in. It's, there's people like me who are in DC and talking to them all the time, but it makes a pretty huge difference when it's not just, me talking to them all the time, like, oh, here comes Katie again. But when it's, actually engaged citizens, it's really important for them to hear from you all.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for giving us a shout out in terms of what you do is extremely important in your lobbying, and but we're sort of the grassroots below that, buoying that up with our letters. So great. Thanks very much. God, it's so big and comprehensive, this bill. It's I wonder how many people wrote it,
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. Over a long period of time, probably, in anticipation. Let's take a breath, and if there are questions, either I can see everybody, so you could just raise your hand in the squares. And Vivian Kane, where are you from, Vivian? In Philly? Oops, where'd you go?
Or Hadash. Oh, wow. Sorry. Oops.
There you are.
Okay, sorry. Reconstructionist synagogue in the Philly suburbs.
Got it.
Anyway, I was just curious, like when they talk about, people say somebody is in a coal mining area, maybe owns a house. I mean, are they going to be putting jobs for them right there? I mean, how can people just get up and move if they have houses and things like that? I just wonder how this can really, helping those particular, people.
Yeah, that's such an important
That's so
question.
simple.
How the labor unions view this, because we keep
Yeah.
hearing the jobs aren't comparable and blah blah blah. It's going to be hard transition.
It's a really good question, and it's actually one of the things that we work on a lot, and is a big misnomer that we're often having to talk about on the Hill. Everybody's like, oh, they'll just move, it'll be fine. People don't want to move out of their communities. That's where their friends are, that's where their family is. So that's why we've really been leaning into the investments in infrastructure and manufacturing. The infrastructure investments by themselves provide a lot of work, a lot of work. And many of the coal communities you're referring to have been seriously underinvested in terms of infrastructure for a very long time. And so it might take a little bit of retraining for those folks to be able to work in the infrastructure, but probably not a lot. And so that's one way. The other way, and more long-term way, is in all of the manufacturing investments that are included in the American Jobs Plan. So the idea would be to take all the clean energy that we're hoping to build out in the next 20 years, 10, 20 years, but to make it here and make the components of it here wherever possible. And a lot of these places are great places for that, and used to house that sort of industrial manufacturing component. And again, there would have to be some training, but that would be a much more long-term solution. So yes, that is a great question. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah, and a difficult question and process. I was wondering how the Reclaim Act maybe interfaces with that.
Yes, I think probably the main way it interfaces with it is it's hard to do economic development if you have abandoned mine lands everywhere. So that's the number one way. People don't really want to build things if there's a chance of mine waste just falling in, things like that. And the other piece of that is it specifically requires that you clean up abandoned mine lands, but in an economic development kind of way. So that's sort of the two ways that the Reclaim Act would play into that.
Who else had a question? Raise your hand. Elliot. Or me?
Hi, thank you so much for coming back and talking to us. I'm wondering what the plan is for building momentum around this. I mean, this is such a huge, important act, and we need millions of people pounding on their legislators' doors saying, this is exactly what our country needs. So tell us what kind of campaign we're gonna.
Yeah, also a great question. So most of the big nonprofits and the unions and pretty much anybody who has some kind of stake in it has built out a campaign arm for this, as has I believe the DCCC. I mean, they have to be a little more quieted about it, but they're certainly providing their members with a lot of resources to help them get the message out. So at least at the BlueGreen Alliance, we have a campaign director and we have 3 organizers that we did not have before. They're literally their entire job is to really build the momentum for this, and they're holding events in important places. So I mentioned the $45 billion for the lead service lines, where we're holding an event, hopefully with the vice president in Baltimore. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, it's not confirmed yet, to just try and say, look, this is really important, and try to bring other high-level administration officials in, try to bring local leaders in, local workers in, and say, look how much this would do for the community, look how many jobs this would create. So that's one example of it from the BlueGreen Alliance perspective, but I know that that's happening all over the place, and certainly senators and representatives are getting sent home on these recesses, and they're just talking about it nonstop.
Great, thanks for the question, Elliot. Judy Burlfine, we see your travel itinerary. We see you driving.
Yeah, we're Judy's driving and Dobla's navigating and talking.
Okay. Did you have a question? Your connection's not very good. If you have a question, you want to put it in the chat, because it's breaking up.
Thank you.
We got a lot of breaking up tonight. You put it in the chat, okay? Stephanie, is it Joffe?
Jofi.
Joffe?
Jofi. I have just a sort of practical question. What if Joe Manchin doesn't come along? How will this be passed with reconciliation without him? That's something I've been wondering.
You and a lot of other people. So right now, what we're hearing is that the House is going to proceed as normal. They're going to put together their reconciliation package that's going to look just like the American Jobs Plan is proposed. They're going to send it over to the Senate. I think that, Senator Schumer isn't entirely sure what to do with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema at this point, because they're actually both. There's 2 of them now instead of just the one. So there's a few ways people are trying to address that. They're trying to point out all of the ways that this package would help West Virginia, which it would be a lot of ways beyond just the abandoned mine land piece, just the basic infrastructure pieces. So the campaign folks are trying to really lean into that. There's also some sort of behind the scenes procedural stuff going on to try and figure this out. It's possible that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema just need some cover, is what we like to call it. So right now, the House and the Senate have passed a surface transportation bill separately from this package that we're talking about. And there's some hope that will be considered, the big bipartisan package that he's going for. And then he'll just sort of like release some of his worries about this bigger package. With the House, they're sending all of their stuff over, so it's possible that at the last minute, he'll complain a lot, and then the last minute he'll vote for the House version or some version of the House version. All of that being said, yes, it's very frustrating. And the campaign folks are working on it. The policy folks like me are trying to work on it, trying to convince him. I wish I had a more clear pathway to tell you.
Yeah.
Does it help from people from other states to write to him, or?
Probably not. He's so West Virginia focused. I mean, really, really West Virginia focused, even though he's the chair of a committee now. So, you know, if you know people in West Virginia, great, enlist them, let him hear from his constituents, but it's probably not extremely useful for you to do so yourself if you're not a West Virginian.
At least his email, you can email him. There's some Congress people that don't even accept you if you're not one of their constituents. I have a question,
Yeah, please.
or a couple of questions.
Mhm.
So one is, I'm still not clear on the current status of this. Has a bill been put together, or and if it's being argued or put together by committees, which committees are involved?
Good question. There is no current bill. You know, there's the proposal that we all saw from President Biden, but there's no actual bill text to match that yet. So what's happening behind the scenes right now is pretty much every committee. And when I say every committee, I do mean every committee other than the Appropriations Committee is going through their list of bills in their jurisdiction and saying, okay, do we think this matches a part of the American Jobs Plan? Can we justify putting this in the American Jobs Plan? And they're sort of vetting all of those behind the scenes right now. They also have to make sure that those bills can get through what's called the Byrd Rule in the Senate, which is a major feature of reconciliation. I don't want to dive too far into that because it gets very wonky very fast. But what the Byrd Rule essentially requires is that anything that's in a big reconciliation package, like we've been talking about, is really only about money. It can only incidentally change policy. So you can't really stand up a whole new program. You can't make really big modifications to an existing program. You can really just throw a lot of money at them for the most part. So that's the other thing they're doing. And no, text doesn't exist yet. We're told that it should exist sometime in July, maybe August.
What is not here? Text, did you say?
Text, yeah, the legislative text or bill text.
Oh, okay, yeah. Also, I often focus my efforts on trying to convince our Republican senator to try to support some of these issues. And is there some aspect of this bill, this proposal, or perhaps a strategy that you can suggest that would appeal to Republicans? I mean, besides the fact that it probably will benefit a lot of their constituents.
Who's your Republican senator?
Toomey.
Toomey. Oh, well, Senator Toomey, you, sir, would benefit a lot from the manufacturing provisions because Pennsylvania, I mean, those are very much needed in a lot of parts of the state. He would benefit, his constituents would benefit a lot from many of the cleanup provisions. So there's brownfields, Superfund, abandoned mine lands, like I've mentioned a few times. Those he would benefit from, and both of those probably aren't totally in his radar right now, but there's an argument to be made for immediate jobs on the cleanup side of things and long-term jobs that have been lost and could be regained on the manufacturing side of things. And then all of the Republicans are very much into the old school bread and butter, roads, bridges, airports, sort of what you immediately think of when you think of infrastructure. A lot of their skepticism comes from like the more social infrastructure side of things. So maybe stay away from that, but I think you could push him on manufacturing and you could push him on the environmental cleanup parts.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, good question. Good question. Toomey is who we targeted with the Reclaim Act, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And any other questions? Just raise your hand, your physical, oh, if you can. Oh, let's see. Let me look in my, oh, Stephanie, you asked your question, right? You already asked your question. Did you have another one by any chance, Stephanie? You off it?
No, I just forgot to put my hand down.
That's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure. Yes, Rachel.
You know, watching all of this, I'm remembering that the only thing I've ever seen about how the economy is doing for labor is somebody who really knows, like the Secretary of Labor talks about the unemployment rate or whatever and why. And I'm just wondering, are there any other kinds of reports that, say, a Secretary of Labor could make after, God willing, this bill is passed, to show what seems to be working in the plan? You know, what things are really, really, really working, and what kind of outcome indicators would be used, especially if there's a problem with the language that you can't put a lot of policy in it. You were just saying that you're going to try to just have very few philosophical words and just talk about it like these are usual things that we all want to do. I mean, how does the evaluation, the performance indicator, come out at the end of all of this to people who are hoping that it will make a big difference?
That's a great question. So one of probably actually the biggest indicator that we would look for, and that a Secretary of Labor, Secretary Walsh, would look for, would be the jobs that people get at the end of training. So the American Jobs Plan has a lot of money for training and reskilling folks who've lost their jobs, and to train them in other things relevant to like a clean energy economy. All of that could be done through reconciliation, but something that happened in 2009, the last time we had a really big package, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, is that we put a lot of money into training through that act, and people didn't have jobs at the end of it. There's a really, really famous example. There was the weatherization assistance program. Folks are supposed to get trained to basically make buildings more efficient. They got trained and there weren't jobs at the end. And so that's probably the single biggest indicator that a Secretary Walsh or someone similar should look for at the end of this. Is it working? Are people actually getting jobs at the end of it? Is all of this training, this sort of sector-based training that's provided in the plan, do people actually get jobs? And then
as a corollary to that, how would an ordinary person such as myself find out what the Secretary has discovered?
Yeah, probably the best way, when they have something big like that to announce. So if this gets passed in September, they'll release a press release on that. They'll probably next spring, maybe a year from now, there will be a big, fairly splashy press release. It'll probably get picked up by national outlets.
Okay, I didn't realize. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and they'll want to trumpet their successes. You know, the Biden administration will say, "Look at us, we successfully created XYZ number of jobs in these fields."
Okay,
great. All right. Well, thank you for all those questions. I went, Bob. Where are you from, Bob?
Silver Spring, Maryland.
Oh, from Silver Spring.
Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Neighbors.
Far away from you.
All right. One more quick question. I'll let you go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, seeing how the text hasn't been written, I was wondering if the section about retraining could be renamed to the coal miners' GI Bill of Rights, so that it mentioned a little more cover. But the other thing I was really worried about is, with the current Supreme Court, is the Congress having to write the laws to direct the court not to strike it down? because like with the clean power of Obama, the court struck a lot of that down. Are people really going to be mindful as they write the text of this, that it gives directions to say that, this is what the Congress really wants and that the Supreme Court should back off?
Yeah, really good questions. So in terms of the GI Bill of Rights for coal miners, that's probably what we're working on, is we're trying to say, if you don't have jobs at the end of this for these dislocated coal miners and natural gas workers and folks like that, then it's useless. You got to lean into that part of it. So appreciate that comment. And then to your question on the Supreme Court, the good thing about this package probably going through reconciliation and having to mostly be about funding of existing programs is that there probably won't be any, or maybe just one or two new programs created by this, which means that there won't be really any kind of test updated. A lot of the programs that this money will go into will be long-term existing things. So they'll be less likely to be challenged in court. Everybody wants more money for all of their various priorities. And so it's unlikely, I'm not going to say it's not impossible. There's always somebody willing to file a lawsuit, but it's unlikely that there's going to be a lot of challenges. So even with the current Supreme Court makeup, this should be a pretty good package.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your questions. They're always very insightful questions. Good challenge for our speakers. And thank you very much, Katie Harris, for filling us in on updating us so that we can have more to speak about in our letters. And thank you, Rabbi Kenter, for your invocation at the beginning and spurring us on in this very sacred work. I wanted to give Mirla a few minutes to close out the meeting to talk a little bit about the trip to Minnesota and how inspiring that was. I think she has a fantastic picture.
Wow, that's so nice of you to ask. Thank you so much. So Dee Herman, also on the steering committee, and I both went to Minnesota last week for the Line 3 protests. Did everyone raise your hand if you saw something about the Line 3 protests in Minnesota on the news? Some people didn't even see it. Go back and watch the news. Okay, so there's a big pipeline that's being built from Canada to bring tar sands, dirty oil to Lake Superior. And it's basically
We'll have to mute you, Rachel. I'm sorry.
Basically, it's like the Keystone Pipeline, which was also supposed to transport tar sands oil. The indigenous people, the Native Americans in that area of northern Minnesota, have been fighting this for 7 years. And there are a lot of reasons to be against it. From our point of view, the first thing is we don't want to burn tar sands oil. I think I read don't quote me on this, but I think I read that if they burn that oil, it'll be the equivalent of 35 coal-powered power plants every year. So it's dirty, terrible oil, terrible for climate change. The second thing is this area is so beautiful. It's all water there. You drive down the road and it's wetland, lake, stream. They're worried there's going to be 22 crossings of water if this pipeline is built. For sure, there are going to be spills. It's going to pollute the water. That water, by the way, I swam up there in the headwaters of the Mississippi. Did everyone hear that?
Mm-hmm.
I want to show you that picture. I have a picture of myself. I made a few dips like I was in a mikveh and said a blessing. It was so beautiful. And I learned that, this water is flowing, basically through a great deal of the country. So we need to preserve it. And then finally, it's just another injustice to the Native Americans. Where we stayed was between 3 reservations, and we learned all about the treaties that have been broken, that there are 3 kinds of treaties. And one of them is called a usufructuary treaty. Do we have any lawyers here? I had never heard of that before, but one of the lawyers explained to us that they ceded the land way back in the day for settlers to live there, but they retain the rights to gather the wild rice. That's where wild rice comes from. That's their sacred food. And to hunt and fish. And as one of the lawyers said to us, what good is the right to collect the wild rice and hunt and fish if the water's polluted. So we were very excited. 2,000 people came from all around the country, including 400 that participated in our multi-faith delegation. And that was amazing. They didn't think they'd get that many people, but they said after 7 years, they needed to do something different. 200 people participated in civil disobedience and got arrested. And basically this project could be stopped. I won't go into more of the horrible details, but this project could be stopped by the stroke of a pen from President Biden. So please call the White House and say, please stop Line 3 and all other fossil fuel infrastructure projects. We don't want any of them. And if anyone's interested, it was really an inspiring, awesome thing to be there, not only to meet the local people there and hear about their fight, but also to be with all these people of faith from all around the country and to learn about the Native American issues. And just to, it was like a utopia. People came from all over the country, taking care of each other, you know, feeding each other.
Woodstock.
It was like Woodstock, yeah.
Woodstock of the North.
And it was super inspiring. And if you're interested, we're making ourselves available to talk to any Jewish community about the project and, you know, the bigger picture of how this fits into our climate struggle. So please go and check out the news about it. Call President Biden. You can also donate to the bail fund, which they need a lot of money for the bail. Invite us to come and speak with you. And I'll just finish by saying that I'm going to stay on after this call. If anyone would like to write letters with me, I know I have trouble doing it by myself. If you'd like to do your letters tonight, we're going to just get them done together. And I think that's it. That's all I was supposed to say, right?
I think so.
Okay.
But I think you said that there'll probably be something coming out of the Headwaters action for people to view about that the groups that went will be talking and
Yeah.
sharing their experience.
Yeah.
That's coming up.
Right.
And I want to say that we've had some successes that are showing up. The Keystone is gone. The roadless rule, this is the Tongass forest behind me. The roadless rule act was signed by executive order, and we can win this one too, line 3. Against line 3. So keep up the good work, keep up persisting in this very sacred work. Thank you all for coming tonight. There was much good news this week to be hopeful for. So remain calm, keep the faith. Blessings to you all, our loyal climate activists, and have a good night and stay on with us if you'd like to write your letters. Okay, great. Good night.